Could the US be on the verge of losing the trade war with China? Although it was thought that the tariff war would be a powerful attack, in reality it brought unpredictable consequences. America's short-term gains are now at the expense of long-term weakness, and China may be seizing the opportunity to overtake it. Can America turn the tide before it's too late? US loses to China in the trade war? Sounds shocking, but completely possible. On April 18, 2025, Bloomberg released a financial simulation showing that scenario is not unrealistic. The US could be the one to fall. Don't think the dollar will always be the king. China is playing an extremely dangerous financial game, with leverage of more than $1 billion, 0 cents in US Treasury bonds, and the world's largest foreign exchange reserves. With this type of weapon in hand, Beijing can completely stir up the global financial market. If China sells off its bonds or devalues the yuan, the US financial system could really shake. Not everyone can play this move. Only China has the strength and courage to pull the trigger. And don't forget, the Trump administration has turned the trade war into an aimless, unstrategic gamble just to show off and forget the consequences. Result? America is shooting itself in the foot. If you still think China is just trying to catch up with the US in the economic game, then you should reconsider. In fact, China is not just a side player. They are silently holding a trump card, more than 1,100 billion USD in US Treasury bonds. And no, it's not a friendly investment. It's a financial weapon that can make Wall Street break out in a cold sweat. What happens if Beijing decides to pull the trigger? A bond sell-off, for example. Immediately, interest rates in the US will catch fire. Public debt, which has reached 34,000 billion USD by 2024, will be strangled. And the dollar, America's symbol of power, will begin to lose credibility. Not because of a military war, but because of a cold punch from the bond market. And here's the interesting part. China isn't just playing defense. They are proactively pivoting. Cut 15% of imports from the US? Already done. Increase trade with Europe and Asian countries? Also working. They no longer want to be dependent on a country whose policies change rapidly with each tweet from Mr. Trump. China is resetting the chessboard. They build a more independent, more solid economic network, where America gradually becomes an outsider if it does not change quickly. While Trump is still busy swinging tariffs like a modern-day cowboy, Beijing is cold, calculating, and patient in each move. The problem is, does America have enough time and alertness to realize that it is playing against the rules on a chessboard that its opponent has prepared for a long time? Exactly. And if you thought 2018 was just a soft blow from Trump to global trade, you should consider whose face that punch turned around and hit when he announced a 245% tax on Chinese goods, especially ships, with the reason of saving the American shipbuilding industry. Perhaps he thought he was the Captain America of heavy industry. But then what? That tax imposition is like a boomerang. It flies around beautifully and then comes back to hit the US economy. Consequence? Exports plummeted 30%. Imports decreased by 64% in April 2025 alone. Americans no longer want or cannot spend money on expensive goods. What about the world? They are also not interested in made-in-America items anymore because no one likes to buy an item that is both expensive and late. What are the consequences? Wall Street must speak up, panicking and warning of a recession if this war does not cool down soon. But wait, it's not over yet. America's public debt has reached 34,000 billion USD by 2024, a number that if you type on a computer, you have to struggle to find enough zeros. The budget deficit is no less impressive. From 3.7% of GDP in 2022, it jumped to 6.3% in 2023. And that happens while the economy still hasn't seen the light at the end of the tunnel. Additionally, the unemployment rate begins to rise again in 2025, meaning the American workers whom Trump promised would bring their jobs back are falling into unemployment. So in the end, what does it mean to make America great again? Great in terms of debt, or great in shooting yourself in the foot with tax policy? A trade war that began with blind confidence continued with a series of emotional decisions and is now ending with an economic crash. And meanwhile, China still sits there, calmly calculating each move. What about Trump? Maybe he's still thinking he's winning a resounding victory. If this is victory, then no one wants to know how bad defeat will be. China isn't just threatening with US bonds. They are launching a new financial weapon, the digital yuan. Already tested in more than 20 provinces, the digital currency aims to promote cross-border transactions and reduce dependence on the US-controlled SWIFT payment system. Meanwhile, the position of the USD is shaky. According to the IMF, the USD's share in global foreign exchange reserves has dropped to 58% by 2024, the lowest level in 30 years. This is a sign that global trust in the USD is decreasing. Not stopping at cryptocurrency, China is also actively collecting gold, more than 700 tons in 2 years, along with the discovery of 2 new gold mines. This is a strategic step to strengthen its position in the precious metals market. If the USD continues to weaken and the Fed cuts interest rates by the end of 2025, gold prices could exceed $2,300, 0 cents/ounce, making gold an alternative haven to the USD. Clearly, China is building a parallel financial system independent of the US, not only for defense, but also to gradually push USD away from the global financial throne. Many people think China can knock down the US just by selling off US Treasury bonds. But the reality is not that simple. Selling off will cause the value of China's own foreign exchange reserves to plummet, like shooting yourself in the foot. Not to mention, if the USD weakens, US exports become more competitive, making China's financial leverage counterproductive. Another option is to devalue the yuan. In 2018-2019, China let the CNY devalue by 11.5%, helping to largely reduce the impact of tariffs. But if it happens again in 2025, and CNY drops deeply to 7.38, CNY/USD, the risk is huge. Strong devaluation could cause capital to flee China like the 2015 shock. This will damage confidence and cause serious economic instability. Meanwhile, Beijing is still trying to keep the exchange rate stable to avoid being labeled a currency manipulator by the US. In short, China has financial weapons, but that doesn't mean they can use them freely. Every step carries a potential risk of suicide, and this war has no room for miscalculation. This isn't a battle of who wins, it's a battle that both can lose. America is not easily bullied in this war. They have enough weapons to counterattack China. One of the strongest moves is to exclude Chinese banks from the USD payment system, like they did with Iran. This could cause China to lose access to the global financial network, an extremely painful blow. Moreover, the US can also freeze the assets of Chinese state-owned enterprises, causing corporations like Huawei or ZTE to suffocate when they cannot maintain international investment or expand global business. This is not just a warning shot, but a real financial shock. The US is also strengthening strategic alliances such as Quad and AUKUS, joining hands with India, Japan, and other allies to create an economic and political belt around China. At the same time, the US is investing heavily in the Asia-Pacific region to diversify supply chains and reduce dependence on China in technology and manufacturing industries. However, this strategy is not simple. The US must calculate carefully to avoid direct collision, because if the limit is exceeded, the consequence will be a widespread crisis for both of the world's largest economies. In short, America has many strong cards, but its moves must be very smart. Because in this game of chess, just one wrong move is enough to put both sides in a dangerous position. The US-China war is not only about trade, but also explodes on the technology front, especially semiconductor chips, a vital element of electric vehicles, AI, and telecommunications. China has restricted the export of gallium and titanium, two important metals for the chip industry, to put pressure on the US. The US responded by banning companies like Huawei and SMIC from accessing high-end chips and chip manufacturing technology in order to restrain Chinese technological advancement. Unyielding, China is stepping up investment in the domestic semiconductor industry, aiming for technological independence by 2030. With support from the state, companies like SMIC are accelerating their development to reduce dependence on the US. This chip war will continue, and both sides are determined not to back down. Who will win is still unclear, but this is certainly one of the fiercest fronts between the two superpowers. The US-China war not only affects the two superpowers, but also shakes global market psychology. Investors began withdrawing capital from risky markets, causing Chinese stocks to plummet. Meanwhile, the US faces rising 10-year bond interest rates, putting pressure on public debt, which has reached $34 trillion. 0 cents. As instability increases, capital flows into safe assets such as gold and high-quality government bonds. Global markets are caught in a panic, and investors seek to protect assets from this ever-escalating economic war. In the end, no one wins, only those who survive the economic storm. The US-China war is not only a tense confrontation between two superpowers, but also has a strong impact on global market psychology. As trade tensions escalate, investors begin to withdraw capital from risky markets, with China one of the first victims. Chinese stocks witness a sharp decline. Indexes plummeted, causing international investors to worry about instability in the world's second-largest economy. However, the situation in the US is not brighter, as 10-year US bond yields skyrocketed, causing borrowing costs to increase and pushing US public debt to $34,000 billion USD, creating more pressure on the economy. Global investors flock to gold and high-quality government bonds as a safe haven, causing gold prices to skyrocket. Faced with this situation, global financial markets fell into a spiral of panic as investors tried to protect their assets from unpredictable volatility. In this war, there are clearly no winners, only those who are lucky enough to survive successive shocks. The trade war between the US and China is escalating and becoming an uncompromising confrontation, bringing both sides closer to the brink. The US is no longer the financial hegemon it once was, facing inflation, huge public debt, and a recession, weakening the dollar and the credibility of the Trump administration. Besides, the US is also being surpassed by China on the technology, currency, and trade fronts. China, despite its skillful use of financial, monetary, and technological strategies, is also facing major challenges such as deflation, local debt, and a real estate crisis. Social stability and people's trust are also at stake. The scenario of both defeat and compromise can occur if there is no amicable solution. If the US cannot resolve public debt and recession, while China cannot overcome the economic and social crisis, both will weaken themselves. This is not a simple war, but a match between two superpowers facing internal challenges, where no one wins absolutely and both will suffer.